I was 30, and I was just plain tired. Tired of my job, tired of the city, tired of everything that felt like it was closing in on me. I needed out, even if it was just for a bit. So I decided to go hiking, by myself, up in North Carolina. I'd never really done a big solo trip before, always had friends along. But this time I wanted quiet. I found this old geocaching forum online, way deep in the internet, and someone had posted about a really remote trail. Sounded perfect. A real escape. I figured, why not? What's the worst that could happen? The drive up there took forever. Once I got close, the paved roads turned to gravel, then to just dirt tracks that barely looked like a road at all. My little car rattled and groaned, but I kept pushing. Finally, I saw it, or what I thought was it. Just a small pull-off, really, with a beat-up wooden sign leaning to one side. I parked and got out, stretching my legs. The air was different here, cooler, cleaner, smelling like pine and wet earth. I walked over to the sign. It was old, weathered, the paint faded, but I could still make out the words, carved roughly into the wood, "Trail closed. Do not continue after dark." I actually chuckled, loudly. The sound seemed to get swallowed by the trees around me. I thought, seriously? This is probably some old thing, or maybe for liability. Like if some idiot falls down a ravine, they can say they warned them. I looked at my watch. It was early afternoon, plenty of daylight left. I figured I'd get a good few hours in, maybe find a spot to set up camp before it got too late. So I ignored it. I stepped over a fallen log and started down the path. The trail itself was pretty overgrown, not a lot of foot traffic clearly, but that was what I wanted, peace and quiet. As I walked, I started noticing some weird stuff, little things at first. Like, I saw two birds sitting on a branch, both exactly the same. Not just the same kind of bird, but like, identical. Same feather ruffled, same tilt of the head. I blinked, and they flew off. Huh, I thought. Just a coincidence. A little further on, I saw two trees that looked like exact mirrors of each other, right down to the way their branches twisted. Then rocks, smooth gray ones, placed just so, like someone had put them there, but there were two, side by side, perfectly matched. It was strange, but I just chalked it up to being out in nature, seeing things differently. Maybe a bit of my brain being tired playing tricks on me. I kept walking, listening to the crunch of leaves under my boots. I felt good, really, despite the odd things. The air was crisp, the sun filtered through the canopy, making dappled patterns on the forest floor. I felt like I was finally shaking off some of that city grime. I walked for what felt like hours, not really paying attention to where I was going, just enjoying the quiet. I was trying to find a good spot, maybe near a stream, to set up my tent. Then, I noticed something. I'd passed this really distinct twisted tree, a big oak with a split trunk, a while ago. I was sure of it. And here it was again. I stopped. That's weird, I muttered. I pulled out my compass. North was still north. I pulled out my map. I hadn't been paying close enough attention to landmarks, but I thought I was going generally in one direction. I decided to try going a different way, just to see. I took a sharp right at the next fork in the trail, figuring I'd gone too far left or something. I walked for another hour, feeling a bit uneasy now. The mirrored objects kept appearing, too. Now it was 3 identical mushrooms growing on a log. My stomach felt a bit tight, and then I saw it again. The twisted oak, the exact same one. I was back at the same spot. It was like the trail was looping me, no matter which way I went. I tried another direction, a left this time, walking faster, trying to get away from the feeling that was starting to crawl up my spine. But it was no use. Every time, after a while, I'd find myself back at that same twisted oak. It was getting dark now, the shadows long and purple. The warning sign flashed in my mind. Do not continue after dark. My heart started to beat a little faster. This wasn't just weird, this was wrong. I was stuck. I was going in circles, literally. I decided to just set up camp right there, near the cursed oak, since I couldn't seem to get away from it. I quickly got my tent up, feeling a frantic energy now. I built a small fire, more for comfort than anything else. The warmth felt good, but it didn't chase away the chill I felt inside. I tried to eat some of the food I'd packed, but my stomach was churning. The woods around me were silent, too silent. Not a single cricket, not an owl, nothing. Just the crackle of my small fire. I sat there, staring into the flames, trying to calm myself down. It was probably just me, tired and alone, making a big deal out of nothing. Maybe the map was wrong, or I was just bad at navigating. I told myself that, but I didn't believe it. There was something deeply unsettling about this place. Then I saw it, just across the small clearing, maybe 20 feet from my fire, sitting by its own small campfire. It was me. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. It looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same hat, same backpack leaning against a tree. It was just sitting there, staring into its own fire, completely still. My heart hammered against my ribs. My eyes darted from my fire to the other me, then back to my fire. My hands started to shake. This wasn't a trick of the light, this wasn't exhaustion, this was real. The other me didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. It was just there, a silent, impossible reflection. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror washed over me. Every hair on my body stood on end. I had to get out. I didn't care where I went, just away from here. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my pack without even thinking about packing up the tent. I just ran. I didn't look back at the other me. I ran blindly through the trees, tripping over roots, branches slapping my face. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just kept moving, fueled by a raw, primal fear. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the thin beam of my headlamp, which seemed to barely penetrate the oppressive gloom. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud in the silent woods. I just ran and ran and ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like lead. I ran until I collapsed, gasping for air, leaning against a tree, my head spinning. I didn't know how long I had been running, but it felt like hours. I could still feel the other me, just sitting there watching. The image was burned into my mind. I must have passed out right there. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to peek through the trees, a faint gray light in the sky. The air was cold and damp. I was lying on the ground, my body aching, covered in scratches and dirt. I slowly pushed myself up, my muscles protesting. I looked around, disoriented. The trees looked different here, less dense, more open. And then I saw it. Just a few yards away, through a break in the trees, was a road, a highway, and next to it, a big green sign. My eyes focused on the words, "Welcome to Tennessee." Tennessee? I was supposed to be in North Carolina, miles and miles away. I had no idea how I got there. My car was back at that trailhead, who knows where. I had nothing but the clothes on my back and my backpack, which was surprisingly still with me. The terror from the night before flooded back, fresh and cold. I looked back into the woods, but it was just trees, normal-looking trees. The other me, the looping trail, the silence, it was all gone. I stumbled onto the highway, sticking out my thumb. Eventually, a kind truck driver picked me up, gave me a ride to the nearest town. I called a tow truck for my car, and it took days to get everything sorted out. I never told anyone exactly what happened out there. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. But I know what I saw. And I know that sometimes a sign is there for a reason. And ignoring it can take you to places you never knew existed, places you never want to see again. I never went hiking alone again. And I definitely never ignored a trail closed sign after dark. My girlfriend Sarah and I loved getting out of the city. We weren't exactly hardcore campers, but we liked the idea of it. Fresh air, campfires, no cell service, that kind of thing. This particular trip, we were heading up near her cousin's land in West Virginia. He'd told us there were some good spots, real quiet, not many people around. That sounded perfect to us. The drive was long but nice, just us and the road, talking about nothing and everything. We got off the main highway onto smaller roads, then dirt tracks, and finally, just before we reached what we thought was the turnoff for her cousin's property, we saw it. It was a huge boulder, probably twice the size of my car, just sitting there at the side of the road. And on it, in bright, ugly orange spray paint, were the words, "Not safe after dusk." Sarah laughed first. "Look at that," she said, pointing. "Some local kid trying to scare people, probably. Or some grumpy old man." I chuckled too. "Yeah, probably. Or maybe it's a joke, like a prank for campers." It looked like someone had put real effort into it, bold letters, standing out against the gray rock. But it felt more like a silly warning than anything serious. We'd seen similar things before. Fake haunted trails or signs warning about bears that were probably just squirrels. We were young, feeling good, and a spray-painted rock wasn't going to tell us what to do. "Think this is the turn?" Sarah asked, craning her neck to look down a narrow, unpaved lane. "Looks like it," I said, slowing the truck. We bounced down the lane, the trees closing in around us. After a few minutes, we found what looked like a good spot. It was a hollow, kind of a bowl-shaped dip in the land, surrounded by trees. It felt secluded, protected. "Perfect," I said, shutting off the engine. The sudden silence was deep, like the woods just swallowed the sound of the truck. We spent the rest of the afternoon setting up camp. We were pretty efficient. I got the tent pitched, Sarah unrolled the sleeping bags. We gathered some firewood, cleared a spot for the fire pit. The sun was still high, but it was starting to dip behind the taller trees, casting long shadows. It was quiet, peaceful, exactly what we wanted. We cooked up some hot dogs over the fire, talking and laughing, feeling completely relaxed. The spray-painted boulder was long forgotten. It was just us, the woods, and the crackle of our small fire. As twilight deepened, a strange thing happened. The forest went silent. And I mean silent. Usually, even at night, you hear things. Crickets chirping, owls hooting, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant hoot of an owl, maybe a coyote somewhere far off. But it became utterly, completely still. No wind, not even a whisper through the leaves. No insects. Nothing. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire world. The only sound was the low hiss of our dying campfire and our own breathing. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, pulling her jacket tighter around her. "Hear what?" I whispered back. "Exactly," she said, her voice barely audible. "Nothing. It's too quiet. Even the crickets are gone." I listened. She was right. It was unnerving. The silence pressed in on us, heavy and thick. It felt wrong. Not just peaceful, but empty. We looked at each other, and for the first time, a flicker of unease went through me. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen, even around the campfire's glow. We huddled closer, poking the embers, trying to make the fire last longer, as if its warmth and light could push back against the weird quiet. We decided to turn in early. The silence was getting to us. We crawled into the tent, zipped it up tight, and burrowed into our sleeping bags. I pulled the drawstring on my bag right up to my chin. The tent felt thin, flimsy, not nearly as protective as it had seemed just a few hours ago. We lay there, side by side, not talking, just listening. Or rather, not listening, because there was nothing to hear. The silence was absolute. And then, it started. A sound, small at first, a faint giggle. Sarah stiffened beside me. Her hand reached out and grabbed mine, squeezing tight. Her grip was cold. Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me in the dark tent. The giggle came again, a little closer this time. It wasn't a child's giggle, though it sounded high-pitched. It was wrong. It sounded mocking, like something laughing at us. Then we heard movement outside the tent, soft, padding steps, not like an animal. It sounded too deliberate. And then, a scratching sound, like something with long nails dragging across the nylon of the tent. It wasn't just one scratch. It was a series of quick, light scratches, moving around the tent. "What is that?" Sarah whimpered. I didn't answer. I had no idea. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum in my ears. I pictured a raccoon, or maybe a curious fox, but the giggle, animals don't giggle. And those sounds on the tent, those weren't animal sounds. The padding steps continued, circling our tent. Slowly, methodically. We could hear the faint rustle of leaves under whatever it was. And the giggling, it continued too, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, but always circling us. It was a soft sound, almost airy, but it chilled me to the bone. It felt like it was right outside, just inches from our heads. We lay there, absolutely still, barely breathing. Every nerve ending was on fire. I squeezed Sarah's hand, trying to be strong for her, but I was just as terrified. This was not a joke. This was not some prank. After what felt like an eternity of just the giggles and the soft circling footsteps, another sound joined in, a scraping, a steady, rhythmic scrape, like something sharp being dragged along the dirt. It sounded like it was right outside our tent, directly in front of the flap. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It continued, over and over. It sounded like a stick, a sharp stick, dragging, but it didn't stop. It just kept going, round and round, a constant, grating noise that was slowly driving me insane. I imagined whatever was out there, circling our tent, dragging something. We spent hours like that. I don't know exactly how long. It felt like the entire night. The giggles would fade, then come back, always just out of reach, but always there. The footsteps continued to circle, and that scraping sound, that endless, perfect drag of a stick against the ground, going in a perfect circle around our tent. I imagined a hand, a clawed hand, holding a stick, just walking slowly, deliberately, around and around us. It was methodical, horrifying. It felt like we were trapped inside a cage, and something was drawing the bars of our prison. I tried to close my eyes, but the sound was too loud in my head. I opened them, staring into the blackness of the tent ceiling, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a way out. There was no way out. We were just stuck there, listening to whatever it was outside. My mind started playing tricks on me. Was it getting closer? Was it stopping? I held my breath, then realized it was still going, that endless, chilling scrape. Sarah was silent beside me, just clutching my hand. I could feel her shaking. I was shaking too. We were both just waiting for whatever was outside to stop, or to break in. But it just kept circling. Hours and hours of it. My body was stiff with tension, my eyes burned. I felt like I was losing my mind. Finally, the scraping stopped. Just like that. The giggles were gone too. The footsteps had faded some time before. The silence returned. The deathly quiet that had started the night. We lay there for a long time, not daring to move. Had it gone? Was it waiting? The silence felt even heavier now, charged with unseen menace. I wanted to wait until the sun came up, until I could see. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself to sleep, to escape the nightmare, but it was impossible. My heart was still pounding. After what felt like another eternity, a faint gray light started to filter through the tent fabric. It was morning. The nightmare was over. We had made it. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. No answer. "Sarah?" I said again, a little louder, a terrible dread starting to coil in my stomach. I reached out for her hand. It wasn't there. My eyes snapped open. The tent was still dim, but I could see the empty space beside me. Her sleeping bag was empty, just a rumpled pile of fabric. "Sarah!" I pushed myself up, scrambling to my knees. "Sarah, where are you?" My voice sounded loud and desperate in the stillness of the tent. I fumbled for the zipper, my fingers clumsy with panic. I threw open the flap and tumbled out, my eyes scanning the campsite. Our small campfire was just a pile of cold ash. The hollow was still there. The trees still ringed around us. And Sarah was gone. Her camp chair was overturned. Her jacket lay on the ground, just where she'd left it. Her hiking boots were neatly placed by the tent flap. There were no signs of a struggle. Nothing broken, nothing torn up. No blood, no dragged marks on the dirt. It was like she had just vanished. Stepped out of her sleeping bag and walked away into the silent woods without a sound, without a trace. My mind reeled. Sarah! I screamed her name, my voice cracking. I ran around the campsite, frantically searching, calling her name again and again. Sarah, answer me, please. Nothing. Only the stillness of the woods. The silence was back, just as absolute as it had been last night. I spun around, desperate, trying to find some clue, any sign, and that's when I saw it. About 50 feet from our tent, deeper in the hollow, tucked partly behind a thick cluster of pines, was another tent. My breath hitched. It was identical to ours. Same brand, same model, same faded blue color. It was pitched perfectly, too, just like we'd done ours. It looked exactly like our tent, but it wasn't ours. Ours was right behind me. I stood there staring, my mind unable to process it. A second tent? How? When? It hadn't been there when we set up camp yesterday. It hadn't been there when I woke up and stumbled out of our tent just moments ago. Had it? I couldn't remember seeing it. It felt like it had just appeared. I walked towards it slowly, my legs heavy. It felt unreal, a trick of the light. But it was there, solid and real, casting a dark shadow in the early morning light. I reached out a hand, almost afraid to touch it. It was made of the same kind of nylon, felt the same. I could see the faint outline of a sleeping bag inside, just like ours. Then the panic really set in. What if Sarah was in there? What if this was some sick, twisted joke? I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so badly it was hard to unlock it. No signal. Of course. We were out in the middle of nowhere. I had to get help. I had to get out of here and find someone. I started running, stumbling back the way we'd come, towards the dirt track, towards the road, towards that giant boulder with the spray-painted warning. I didn't stop to think, didn't stop to pack. I just ran. I was screaming Sarah's name over and over as I crashed through the undergrowth. It took me a long time to get back to where the truck was parked. My lungs burned, my legs ached. I scrambled into the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys, my heart still racing. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound of normalcy. I slammed it into reverse, and then drove as fast as I dared down the bumpy track, my eyes darting everywhere. Finally, I reached the main road. I spotted the huge boulder. Not safe after dusk. The words seemed to jump out at me now, stark and terrifying. I swerved around it, not wanting to look at it anymore, and sped down the highway, pushing the truck faster than I ever had. I had to get to a place with cell service. I had to call for help. It was almost an hour later, maybe more, when I finally got a signal. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands still shaking. I called the sheriff's department. I tried to explain what happened, but it sounded crazy, even to me. My girlfriend, she's gone. She vanished from our tent, and then another tent appeared, an identical one. The dispatcher sounded confused, but she promised to send someone. Can you tell me exactly where you were, sir? What's the closest landmark? I gave her directions as best I could, describing the dirt track, the hollow, the big painted boulder. She said it would take them a while to get there, but they were on their way. I sat there, waiting, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, willing the police car to appear. The sun was getting higher, casting a warm glow over the mountains. I tried to calm myself, to breathe. Sarah was gone, but maybe they could find her. Maybe the other tent would give them a clue. After another hour, maybe two, I saw the flashing lights in the distance. Relief washed over me so strong I almost cried. 2 sheriff's cruisers pulled up behind my truck. 2 deputies got out, looking serious. You the one who called? One of them asked, a burly man with a kind face. Yes, I am. My girlfriend, she's gone. We were camping back in that hollow. There was another tent, just like ours. You have to see it. I was rambling, my voice high and frantic. All right, calm down, son, the other deputy said gently. Show us the way. I got back in my truck, and they followed me. We drove back down the highway, turned onto the dirt track, bouncing along. My heart started to pound again as we got closer to the hollow. I was so relieved they were here. They'd believe me when they saw the other tent. We pulled up to the clearing where my truck had been parked. I jumped out, pointing. "It's right there, just down that path, in the hollow." The deputies looked at each other, then back at me. "All right," the first one said, and they followed me into the woods. We walked down into the hollow. I led them to where our tent was still standing, looking small and abandoned. "This is our tent," I said, pointing. "And she was in her sleeping bag right here." And then she was gone. No struggle. They nodded, looking around. One of them took out a notepad. "And the other tent, sir?" My eyes darted to the spot behind the cluster of pines, where the identical tent had been. It wasn't there. My jaw dropped. "What? No, it was right here. I swear to God. 50 feet from our tent, tucked behind these trees. It was identical." I walked quickly to the spot, pushing through the pines. There was nothing. Just normal forest floor. No flattened grass, no disturbed leaves, no trace of a tent ever being there. I spun around, looking at the deputies. "No, no, you have to believe me. It was here. I saw it. It looked just like ours, exactly the same." My voice was getting higher, more frantic. They exchanged another glance. The burly deputy put a hand on my shoulder. "Son, there's nothing here. No sign of another tent." He looked around the general area, slowly, carefully. "Are you sure you weren't disoriented? After a night like that?" "I'm not crazy," I shouted, pulling away from his hand. "It was here. I saw it. I came back to the truck. I called you. It was here when I called you." They searched the area for a while, thoroughly. They looked for footprints around our tent. They looked for any signs of struggle, any broken branches. But they found nothing. Nothing to show Sarah had been taken. Nothing to show another tent had been there. They took my statement, trying to be patient, but I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was either hallucinating or had done something to Sarah myself and was trying to cover it up with a bizarre story. They eventually brought in a search and rescue team, and they searched for days. They found nothing, no trace of Sarah. She was just gone. I never went back to that hollow. I never wanted to see that spray-painted boulder again. They never found Sarah. I tried to explain what happened to my family, to hers, but they just looked at me with pity or suspicion. How could I make them understand something that even I could barely believe? I think about that night all the time. The silence, the giggles, the stick, dragging those perfect rings around our tent for hours. And the second tent that appeared out of nowhere, only to vanish before anyone else could see it. I remember the boulder, those simple, stark words. "Not safe, after dusk." We thought it was a joke. We ignored the signs. And that's how Sarah disappeared. My brother, Mike, and we've always been close. Growing up, our dad took us hunting every fall, and it just stuck. It was our thing, even after Dad passed. Every year, we'd pack up the old truck, head out to the woods, and just forget about everything else for a few days. We usually went to the same spot, a real familiar place deep in the state forest, but last year, Mike suggested somewhere new. He'd heard about this area, supposedly good for deer, a lot more remote. Sounded good to me. A bit of a new adventure. We figured, why not? It went bad real fast. We drove for hours, getting deeper and deeper into the mountains. The paved roads turned to gravel, then to just 2 dirt tracks through thick woods. We passed an old, broken-down farmhouse, then nothing but trees and hills for a long time. Finally, Mike pointed to a narrow, overgrown logging trail. "This is it," he said. We bumped along, slow, the branches scraping against the sides of the truck. It felt really isolated, which was exactly what we wanted for a hunting trip. We found a decent spot to pull over, a small clearing next to a creek. We were just about to start unloading our gear when Mike stopped, staring into the trees. "Hey, you see that?" he asked, his voice low. I looked where he was pointing. Through the dense undergrowth, I could just make out something white hanging from a tall oak tree. It looked odd. We grabbed our rifles, just in case, and pushed our way through the bushes to get a better look. What we found made us both stop dead. Hanging upside down from a thick branch, maybe 10 feet off the ground, was a deer carcass. But it wasn't just a regular deer someone had caught and hung up to clean. This one was different. It was completely cleaned, all the meat gone, just bone. And the bones, they weren't just hanging there, they were arranged. The ribs were splayed out, like a weird fan. The leg bones were twisted into impossible angles, almost like symbols. It looked like someone had taken the time to deliberately pose the skeleton. It was spooky, real spooky. Not like anything we'd ever seen out hunting. The air around it felt heavy, silent. Even the birds seemed to have gone quiet. I shivered, even though it wasn't cold. "What the heck is that?" I whispered. Mike didn't say anything. He was staring at it, his face pale. Then he pointed to something on the ground near the base of the tree. It was a piece of old cardboard, bent and faded, maybe from a box. And on it, scrawled in thick, black marker, were 2 words, "Go back." Now, we'd seen a lot of weird stuff in the woods over the years. Strange hunters, old hermits, abandoned shacks. But this felt different. It wasn't just a warning. It felt personal. Like someone, or something, was telling us to get lost. I looked at Mike. "Maybe we should listen?" I said. The hair on my arms was standing up. He hesitated. Mike was always the more stubborn one. "Nah," he said, but his voice wasn't as sure as usual. "Probably some crazy local, trying to keep people off his land. Come on, it's just a deer. And a sign. We drove all this way." We both knew it was more than just that. But we were young, maybe a little too proud, and definitely too stubborn to just turn around after a long drive. So we pushed the creepy feeling down. We turned our backs on the hanging deer and the sign, and we went back to our truck. We decided to camp right there, by the creek, a few hundred yards from the deer tree. We set up our tents, 2 separate ones this time, since we were staying for a few days. We built a campfire, got our gear sorted. We tried to act normal, talking about hunting plans for the morning, but the image of that deer, and that sign, kept flashing in my mind. As night fell, the woods became still, not like the normal sounds of night, but eerily quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. We sat by the fire, poking at the embers, the crackle of the flames the only sound for a while. Then we started hearing them, bird calls. But they were wrong, distorted. Like a bird trying to mimic a human whistle, but getting it wrong, making a high, warbling, almost painful sound. "Did you hear that?" Mike whispered, looking up. "Yeah," I said, my voice low. "Sounds like a bird." But it didn't. It sounded off, like a bad imitation. The whistling calls continued, moving through the trees. Sometimes it was just one, a long, drawn-out note that seemed to echo. Other times it was 2 or 3 at once, overlapping, creating a jumbled, unsettling chorus. It wasn't natural. It was too perfect, and then too wrong. Like something was playing a game with us. We tried to ignore it, telling ourselves it was just some weird night bird. But we both knew that was a lie. These weren't normal bird calls. They sounded like they were mocking us, whistling just out of sight, sometimes close, sometimes far. We eventually gave up on the fire and crawled into our tents. We zipped them up tight, pulled our sleeping bags up to our chins. The distorted whistling continued through the night, a constant, eerie soundtrack to our fear. I lay awake for hours, listening to every sound, every rustle. My imagination started running wild. Was it just a bird? Or was it something else? Something that wanted us to go back? I must have finally drifted off, because the next thing I knew, the whistling had stopped, and the woods were silent again. A gray light was starting to filter through the tent fabric. It was morning. I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. We had made it through the night. I unzipped my tent and crawled out, stretching my stiff muscles. The air was cold and damp. I looked over at Mike's tent. It was still zipped up. "Mike?" I called out. No answer. "Mike, you up?" He grunted from inside. "Yeah, just stretching." I stood there for a second, looking around our small campsite, and then I saw it. My heart nearly stopped. Next to Mike's tent, almost touching it, was another tent. A third tent. It was exactly like ours. Same kind of material, same faded green color, same shape. It was pitched perfectly too, like someone had just set it up in the middle of the night. But there were only two of us, and we sure as hell hadn't pitched a third tent. "Mike!" I yelled, my voice loud and sharp. "Get out here, now!" Mike's tent zipper screeched open, and he poked his head out, blinking in the morning light. He saw where I was staring, and his eyes went wide. He quickly crawled out, standing next to me, just staring at the impossible tent. "What in the—" he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. "Who put that there?" We walked slowly towards it, like it might vanish if we moved too fast. We looked inside. It was empty. No sleeping bag, no gear, nothing. Just a perfectly pitched, empty tent, identical to ours, that had just appeared out of nowhere. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't some local prankster. This was something else. Something utterly, completely wrong. The deer, the sign, the whistling. It all clicked into place. We had ignored the warning. And now this was happening. "We gotta go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Now. We pack up everything, and we get out of here." Mike nodded, his face ashen. He didn't argue. We moved quickly, frantic, ripping our tents down, shoving our sleeping bags and gear into our packs. Every rustle in the trees made us jump. Every shadow seemed to move. We threw everything into the back of the truck, not caring about organization, just wanting to be gone. As we were about to jump into the cab, Mike stopped again. He was staring at the big oak tree, where the strange deer had been hanging. He pointed, his hand shaking. "Look," he said. I looked. The deer carcass was still there, hanging upside down, its bones arranged in those weird patterns. But something else was new. On the trunk of the tree, carved deep into the bark, were words. Our names. Mike. And right below it, John. They were carved crudely, but unmistakably, into the living wood. They looked old, weathered, like they'd been there for years, though they definitely hadn't been there yesterday. It was like the tree itself had known we were coming, had expected us, and now it had claimed us. A cold dread settled deep in my stomach. It wasn't just a carving. It felt like a threat, like our names were being marked, claimed. "Let's go," Mike said, his voice flat. He didn't wait for me. He jumped into the truck. I scrambled in after him. I started the engine, slammed it into reverse, and we roared down the dirt track, not looking back. We bounced out onto the main road, then sped away, leaving that place behind. We drove for miles, not saying a word. The sun was fully up now, but the warmth did nothing to chase away the chill I felt. My mind kept replaying the image of our names carved into that tree. It felt like a brand. We didn't stop until we hit a gas station in a small town about 2 hours away. We pulled in, parked, and just sat there for a minute, staring straight ahead. "I need a coffee," Mike said, his voice hoarse. We got out, our legs shaky. As I stretched, I looked over at the bed of the truck, where we'd thrown all our gear. My eyes fell on the back gate. And that's when I saw it. Right there, laid out neatly on the tailgate, was another deer. Not a skeleton. This one was fresh. It was clearly a young doe, small, sleek, still warm. Its eyes were open, staring up at the sky, and its throat was cut clean, freshly killed. There was a small pool of dark blood collecting on the truck bedliner beneath its head. It hadn't been there when we threw our gear in. It hadn't been there when we slammed the tailgate shut. There was no way. We hadn't hit anything on the drive out. And who would have put it there? I looked at Mike. He was staring at it too, his face ashen. He looked like he was going to throw up. What is this?" I choked out. He shook his head, unable to speak. The deer was too perfect, too neatly placed, and too fresh. It felt like a message, a horrifying, personal gift. A second deer, freshly killed, laid right at our door. Or rather, our tailgate. We didn't go hunting again that year. We didn't even talk about it for a long time. We just drove home, the dead deer in the back of the truck, and tried to forget. I don't know what we did with the deer. I think Mike just took it somewhere and dumped it. We couldn't bring ourselves to touch it. We don't talk about that trip much. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those distorted bird calls, those weird whistles that sounded like they were mocking us. And I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, seeing that second tent, empty, identical, just sitting there in the early morning light. And those names, our names, carved into the tree. We never went back to that new spot. We went back to our old, familiar hunting grounds the next year, and we haven't tried anywhere new since. We learned our lesson. Some signs, even if they're just cardboard by a hanging deer skeleton, you gotta listen to them. Because some land ain't meant for you to be on, and some things out in those woods, they really don't want you there, and they'll make sure you know it. A couple summers ago, I was feeling pretty good about myself. I'd finally gotten into shape, started eating better, and decided I was ready for a real challenge. Not just a walk in the park, but a proper, multi-day hiking trip, and I wanted to do it solo. Just me, my pack, and the wilderness. I picked a trail up in a less-known part of the mountains. Somewhere I'd heard was pretty remote but still had marked paths. The idea was to really clear my head, prove something to myself. The first day was exactly what I pictured. Sun was out, the air was clean, and the trail was just tough enough to make me feel like I was earning it. I found a great spot by a small waterfall to camp the first night. Everything felt right. The next morning, I packed up, feeling refreshed, and kept going. The trail got a little rougher, less maintained, which was fine by me. It meant fewer people. Then, late in the afternoon, I saw it. It was a huge oak tree, ancient-looking, with branches that spread out like giant arms. But what made it stand out was the color. It was painted red. Not like a little bit of red paint, but a thick, vibrant, almost bloody red, covering the whole trunk and the lower parts of its biggest branches. It looked so out of place in the green and brown forest that I stopped dead. As I got closer, I saw it wasn't just painted. The red was like a base, and over it, or maybe carved into the wood before the paint, were hundreds of markings. They covered every inch of the trunk I could see. Spirals, lots of them, big ones, small ones, some looking perfect, others jagged and messy. Then there were stick figures, simple, crude shapes of people, some with weirdly long limbs, or too many heads, or no heads at all. And then there were these other shapes. I don't know what to call them. Runes, maybe? Like letters or symbols I'd never seen before, all sharp lines and strange angles. They were carved deep, even through the red paint, or maybe the paint had been applied after, soaking into the fresh cuts. It gave me a weird feeling, like it wasn't just decoration. And then I saw the sign. It was nailed right into the tree, a small, splintered piece of wood, crudely painted white with black letters. It said, "Do not touch. Leave it be." I read it twice. My first thought was, who paints a tree red and then tells people not to touch it? It just made me more curious. It felt like a challenge, or maybe some kind of weird local art project. I mean, it was just a tree, right? And a sign. How much harm could touching it really do? It felt almost inviting, like it dared you. I looked around. No one else was there, just me and this weird red carved tree. The sun was starting to dip lower, and the light coming through the leaves made the red look even darker, almost black in places. I felt a little shiver, but it was more of an exciting shiver than a scary one. I hesitated for a moment, then my hand reached out. I touched it. The bark felt rough under my fingers, but there was something else, a faint vibration, like a very low hum, that I felt more in my bones than in my hand. It was quick, just a second, then it was gone. I pulled my hand back, feeling silly, like I was expecting some kind of magic. Nothing happened. The tree just stood there, red and carved. See? I thought. Nothing. I decided to make camp there. It was getting late, and the tree, despite its strangeness, felt like a landmark. I pitched my tent a little ways off, maybe 30 feet from the tree, in a small clearing. I gathered some wood for a fire, cooked a simple meal, and watched the stars come out. The silence of the woods felt a little different now, though, not unsettling, just aware, like something was watching. I thought about the carvings. What did they mean? Who made them? Were they really old? or just some recent prank. The spiral shape stuck in my head. They seemed to hum, even when I wasn't touching the tree. I tried to shake it off. Just a weird tree. The next morning, I woke up feeling a bit off. Sleep hadn't been as restful as the night before. I packed up my gear, had a quick breakfast, and headed back to the trail. I glanced at the red tree as I left. It looked the same in the morning light, just a strange anomaly in the forest. I started walking, trying to get into my stride, but something felt different. It was subtle at first. I'd be walking along, then I'd blink, and for just a fraction of a second, the shadows would seem to shift, like they were moving when my eyes were closed. It was like a little jump in my vision. I'd blink again, and they'd be still. I thought it was just my eyes. Maybe I hadn't slept well. But it kept happening. Blink, shift, blink, still. It was quick, too quick to really be sure, but it was enough to make me feel uneasy. The forest suddenly felt alive in a way it hadn't before. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing. The sun was getting higher, and the woods were quiet again. Too quiet, maybe, like yesterday. Then I heard it, my name. Mark? It was faint, like an echo, but it was my voice. I stopped dead. My heart gave a thump. Hello, I called out, turning in a slow circle. Is anyone there? Silence. Mark. A little louder this time. Still my voice, but it sounded like it was coming from deeper in the woods, off the trail. It sounded sad, or maybe desperate. Who's there? I shouted, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I gripped my hiking poles tighter. This wasn't right. I was alone. I hadn't seen anyone for miles. I waited, listening, every muscle tense. Nothing. Just the rustle of leaves in the breeze, which now seemed loud and significant. I shook my head. Must be the wind, or an echo, or my mind playing tricks. I was tired, maybe. Too much solitude. I tried to convince myself. But the voice kept coming, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a soft call, always my voice, always from deeper in the trees, pulling me, trying to lure me off the path. I tried to ignore it, forcing myself to keep walking forward on the trail. But it was hard. The voice was so familiar, so personal. It was like I was hearing my own thoughts called out from the darkness. I kept going until late afternoon, trying to put as much distance as I could between me and that tree, and that voice. I found another spot to camp, far from any landmarks, just a quiet clearing. I set up my tent quickly, still hearing the phantom calls of my own voice in the back of my mind. As I unrolled my sleeping bag, I froze. There, on the side of my tent, near the bottom edge, was a spiral carving, small, crude, but unmistakable. Exactly like the ones on the red tree. My breath caught. I ran my finger over it. It wasn't just a smudge of dirt, it was cut into the fabric. How? When? I hadn't seen it when I pitched the tent. It hadn't been there when I packed it this morning. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just in my head anymore. I turned the tent over, frantically searching, and there were more. Small stick figures on another panel. A strange rune near the zipper, all carved, somehow, into the nylon. It was impossible. I checked my backpack. Nothing. My other gear. Nothing. Just the tent. I sat there, staring at the carvings on my tent, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It was connected to that tree. I knew it. I touched it, and now these things were following me. I tried to sleep, but it was no use. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red tree, the carvings, the words on the sign. I could still hear my own voice calling from the woods, faint but persistent. And every time I blinked, the shadows outside the tent seemed to jump. It was a long, terrifying night. The next morning, I woke up feeling even worse. My body was stiff, my head pounding. I barely remembered sleeping. I got dressed, my movements slow and heavy. I went to roll up my sleeping bag, and that's when I saw it. On my forearm. A carving. Not just a mark, but a distinct, red line cut into my skin. It was a spiral. Identical to the ones on the tree, identical to the ones on my tent. It was about an inch wide, right on the inside of my forearm, just below the elbow. It wasn't bleeding, but it was clearly a fresh cut, bright red against my skin. It looked like it had been carved with a sharp, thin tool. I gasped, my stomach lurching. I stared at it, horrified. How? When? I hadn't felt anything. I touched it, my fingers tracing the raw skin. It didn't hurt, but it burned, like a faint, cold fire. This was no joke. This was no prank. This was real. And it was happening to me. The terror that had been a slow buildup over the last day finally exploded inside me. I had to get out. Now. I didn't care about my planned route, or finishing the hike. I just had to get away from whatever this was. I shoved my sleeping bag roughly into its sack, threw my tent into its bag, not bothering to fold it neatly. I crammed everything into my backpack, not caring about organization. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely do the buckles. I slung the pack onto my shoulders and started running. I ran blindly, not looking at the trail, just crashing through the trees. I didn't care about going back to my car, just away from this place, away from the red tree, away from the carvings that were appearing on my body. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig, made me jump. I could still hear my own voice, closer now, urging me, whispering my name. Mark, Mark. The shadows kept jumping when I blinked. I didn't even dare to look at my forearm again. I ran and ran, not stopping, not resting. My lungs burned, my legs screamed. I tripped and fell, scraping my knees, but I immediately pushed myself back up and kept going. I was covered in sweat and dirt, my clothes torn, but I didn't care. All I could think was, get away, get away. I kept telling myself that. Just keep going. You'll get out. You'll find a road, a town, anything. The sun was getting low again, the golden light turning hazy through the trees. I was exhausted, but the fear was a constant adrenaline shot. Then, through the trees, I saw a clearing, and in the middle of it, a massive, ancient oak tree. My heart plummeted, my stomach dropped. No, it couldn't be. It was painted red, covered in spirals, stick figures, and strange runes. I was back at the red tree. After running for what felt like forever, crashing through the dense forest, I had somehow ended up right back where I started. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows. The sign, "Do not touch, leave it be," seemed to mock me. I stood there, gasping for breath, staring at the tree. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, like the red paint was glowing from within. The air around it felt thick, heavy. The silence was absolute. Not a single bird, not a single insect. And then, as I stared at the tree, my eyes drawn to the carvings, I saw a new one. Right on the trunk, bigger than the others, almost perfectly carved. It was a face. My face. It was my eyes, wide with terror, staring back at me from the red bark. My mouth, open in a silent scream. It was my face, looking back at me, trapped on the tree. It was me, but carved into the wood, like all the other symbols. It was as if the tree had taken a piece of me, absorbed it. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled backwards, falling to the ground. The carving on my forearm burned, a sharp, cold ache. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to look away from the tree, but my eyes were glued to my own carved face, staring back at me from the ancient wood. I don't know how long I lay there. It felt like hours, maybe days. The light faded, and the night descended, but the carved face on the tree seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, always watching me. I was frozen by fear, unable to move, unable to look away. The whispers of my own voice were all around me now, no longer coming from deeper in the woods, but from the tree itself, from my own carved face, a soft, mocking murmur of my name. Mark, Mark. When the sun finally rose, bleeding through the trees, the carved face on the tree seemed to fade, becoming just another carving, indistinguishable from the rest. The red paint still seemed to glow, though, a dull, unsettling color. The air felt lighter, the oppressive weight gone. I slowly pushed myself up, my body stiff and sore, every muscle aching. My mind felt numb, empty. I looked at the tree one last time. It was just a red tree with carvings. My face was no longer clearly visible. Had it been a trick of the light? Had I imagined it? I didn't try to find the trail. I just stumbled out of that clearing, walking aimlessly until I hit a dirt road. I walked along it for what felt like forever, my body moving on autopilot, until I finally saw a small, run-down general store. I went in, bought some water and a candy bar, and managed to call for a ride to my car. When I got home, I pulled off my clothes. The carving on my forearm was still there. Faint, but definitely there. A small, red spiral, permanently etched into my skin. It never faded. It never healed completely. It's still there today, a faint red mark, a constant reminder. I never went hiking alone again. I never went back to that part of the mountains. And I definitely never touched anything that a sign told me not to touch. Especially if it was a red tree covered in strange carvings. Some things are best left alone. And some signs are there for a reason, a warning you should listen to. Because sometimes, when you ignore them, a piece of you gets left behind. Or maybe taken. I've always been drawn to the woods, especially at night. There's something about the quiet, the shadows, the feeling of being completely alone under a sky full of stars. So, when I found this new hiking trail that promised some real solitude, I was all in. It was a bit of a drive, pretty far out in a less traveled part of the state, but that was fine by me. The more remote, the better. I pulled off the main road onto a narrow gravel track. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping low behind the hills, painting the sky in oranges and purples. Just as I turned onto the trail's entrance, I saw the sign. It was nailed to a thick pine tree, old and weathered, the paint chipped. It looked like someone had just hand-painted it a long time ago. The words were simple, stark. Stay on the trail. Do not follow the lights. I chuckled to myself. Lights? I thought. What kind of lights? Probably some local kids messing around, or maybe a warning about hunters with headlamps. Or maybe it was just a strange bit of folklore, like the ones you hear about ghost lights in the swamps. Whatever it was, it didn't really register as a serious warning. In fact, it kind of piqued my curiosity. I mean, they tell you not to do something. And what's the first thing you want to do? Go see what they're talking about. Naturally, I figured I'd probably follow the lights if I saw them. I parked my truck a little ways down the trail, grabbed my pack, and started walking. I wanted to get a good hour or two in before it got completely dark, find a decent spot to pitch my tent. The air was cool and crisp, smelled of pine needles and damp earth. It was exactly what I needed. As twilight deepened into full darkness, the stars started to pop out, one by one, until the sky was a blanket of glittering pinpricks. The trail was faint in places, barely visible, even with my headlamp. I walked for a bit longer, enjoying the silence, just the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves. Then I saw them. Blue-white flickers. Just off-trail, through the trees. Not steady, like a flashlight, but a soft, pulsing glow, like embers in a fire, or maybe a really dim lantern. There were several of them, drifting slowly among the trees, maybe 100 feet off the path. They bobbed gently, almost dancing. They weren't coming from anywhere specific, just floating there. My heart gave a little jump. The lights, I murmured. I stopped, staring. They were beautiful, in a strange way. Ethereal. They looked like something out of a fairy tale. The sign popped into my head again. Do not follow the lights. But my curiosity was stronger than any vague warning. These weren't scary. They were just mesmerizing. What were they? Fireflies, but in winter? Some kind of weird fungus? There was no way to tell from the trail. I felt a pull, a strong urge to see them up close, to figure out what they were. I decided to leave the trail, just for a bit. What could it hurt? I could always find my way back. I stepped off the path, pushing through the thick undergrowth. The branches snagged at my clothes, but I kept my eyes on the blue-white flickers. They seemed to move away from me as I approached, always just a little further, drawing me deeper into the woods. They moved slowly, almost like they were waiting for me, leading me. I followed, careful not to lose sight of them. The ground grew uneven, rocky in places. I had to pay attention to where I was stepping, but my gaze kept returning to the lights. They were so soft, so inviting. They pulled me onward, deeper and deeper into the forest, away from the familiar trail. After what felt like a long time, maybe half an hour or more of following them, the lights finally stopped. They hovered in a small clearing, gathering together, forming a faint, shimmering circle. I pushed through the last bit of bushes and stepped into the clearing. And then, just as I stepped inside the faint circle of light, they vanished. Completely. Poof. Gone. One moment they were there, glowing softly, and the next, absolute darkness. The silence of the woods pressed in on me, heavy and cold. I stood there, disoriented, my headlamp beam cutting through the sudden blackness. Where did they go? A chill ran down my spine. The air in the clearing suddenly felt different, heavier, older. I had followed the lights. And now I was in a completely dark clearing, far from the trail, and the lights were gone. Then the whispers started. At first I thought it was the wind. A faint murmur, barely audible. But there was no wind. The air was dead still. And the whispers, they weren't random sounds. They were words. But they were backward, like someone was talking, but playing the recording in reverse. A jumble of distorted syllables, soft and chilling, coming from all directions in the woods around me. It wasn't just one voice, but many, overlapping, forming a low, unsettling hum. I spun around, my headlamp beam sweeping the trees. Nothing. Just the dark, silent forest. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, all at once. My heart started to pound. This wasn't normal. This wasn't a joke. I had messed up. Big time. I had to get out. I turned, trying to retrace my steps, to find the way back to the trail. I remembered pushing through a thick patch of thorny bushes. I aimed my headlamp, searching for them. But the trees all looked the same now. The ground was just a confusing tangle of roots and rocks. I couldn't find the way I had come in. I walked in one direction, then another, trying to find anything familiar. But everything had changed. The trees seemed to have rearranged themselves. The landmarks I thought I'd noticed on the way in were gone, or looked different. The ground wasn't flat anymore. It was sloping in odd ways. It was like the forest itself had shifted around me, becoming a maze. And the whispers continued, growing louder, more insistent, always in reverse, a chilling chorus surrounding me. They seemed to follow my every move, echoing my own growing panic. I tried to focus, to remember, but my mind was racing, fueled by fear. I stumbled through the trees, desperate, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice sounded weak, swallowed by the vast silence broken only by the reversed whispers. I ran, blindly crashing through the undergrowth, tripping over roots, skinning my knees. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. I was utterly lost, deep in a forest that no longer made any sense. The whispers were a constant torment, like a swarm of angry bees buzzing in my ears, just out of understanding. My headlamp started to dim, the batteries dying. The darkness deepened around me, making everything even more terrifying. I finally collapsed, leaning against a tree, gasping for air, my body shaking uncontrollably. The headlamp flickered one last time, and died, plunging me into complete darkness. The whispers seemed to press in closer now, all around me, impossible to ignore. I curled into a ball, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. I just wanted the night to end. I must have passed out from exhaustion and fear. When I woke up, the sun was shining bright. The forest looked normal, peaceful even. The whispers were gone. The strange, rearranged landscape seemed to have returned to normal. I was still lost, but at least the immediate terror was gone. I slowly pushed myself up, my body aching, my clothes torn and dirty. I spent the rest of the day stumbling around, walking in what I hoped was a straight line, until I finally hit a logging road. I followed it for hours, until I saw a truck and flagged it down. The driver was a kind old man, and he drove me to the nearest town. I eventually got a ride back to my truck. It was exactly where I left it. I packed up my stuff and got in the truck. I didn't even want to think about that trail again. I drove away, telling myself it was over. Just a bad trip, a strange experience. But it wasn't over. The lights. They started appearing nightly. Not in the woods, not out in the wilderness. At home. In my backyard. Faint, blue-white flickers, dancing just beyond the tree line, through the fence. Sometimes just one, sometimes several. Always out of reach. I'd see them from my kitchen window as I was making dinner. I'd see them from my bedroom window before I went to sleep. They weren't as bright as the ones in the woods, just soft, distant glows, but they were there, every night. It freaked me out. I started closing all the curtains, trying to block them out. But I knew they were there, just outside, waiting. They never came closer than my fence line. They just hovered, pulsing faintly, silent and watchful. It was like they were reminding me of that night in the woods. I tried to tell a few friends, but they just looked at me like I was losing it. "You're stressed," they said. "You need a vacation." How could I explain that the vacation was where it all started? I got restless. I couldn't sleep well in my own house anymore. Every night, I felt their presence outside, like eyes watching me from the darkness. I decided I needed to get away again, somewhere far from my house, somewhere these lights couldn't follow. I booked a motel room in a city about 4 hours away, a place I'd never been. I packed a small bag and just drove. I checked into the motel, got to my room on the second floor, and immediately drew the blackout curtains. I didn't even look outside. I just wanted one night of peace, one night where I didn't have to worry about those blue-white flickers. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to relax. It felt good to be away. Maybe this would break the spell. Maybe they wouldn't find me here. I felt a tiny spark of hope. I must have fallen asleep. I woke up with a start. The room was dark, but a faint, insistent glow was bleeding in from the edges of the curtains. It was just a sliver of light, but I knew. My heart began to pound. No, it couldn't be. I slowly, very slowly, reached out and pulled the curtain aside just an inch, peeking through the gap. And there they were. Just outside my motel window, hovering maybe 20 feet off the ground, a cluster of blue-white flickers. They pulsed softly, gently. They were brighter than the ones I saw in my backyard, almost as bright as the ones that had lured me into the woods. They were silent, just hanging there, watching. They had followed me. 4 hours away, to a random motel in a strange city. They were still there, and they knew where I was. I pulled the curtain shut, my hand trembling. I backed away from the window, stumbling, until I hit the opposite wall. I slid down, collapsing onto the floor, my knees pulled to my chest. The whispers weren't there, not yet, but I could almost hear them. Backward, chilling, mocking. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat there, pressed against the wall, staring at the curtain, knowing what was on the other side, knowing they were still waiting. And I knew, deep down, that they would never stop. They would follow me wherever I went. They would always be there, just outside, a constant reminder of the time I ignored the sign. The sign that told me, plainly, to not follow the lights. Me and 3 of my friends, we were always looking for something to do, something different. Not just hanging out at the mall or playing video games. We liked exploring. Old abandoned places were our favorite. So when my buddy Dave heard about these old chimney ruins way out in the sticks, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, we were all over it. He said it was an old homestead, burned down maybe 100 years ago, supposedly nothing left but the stone chimneys. Sounded cool. Something you wouldn't just stumble onto. So it was me, Dave, Mark, and Chris. We packed up Dave's beat-up old truck with some shovels, metal detectors, and camping gear. Figured we'd make a weekend of it. Get out of town, poke around, maybe find some old coins or tools, just something cool. It was a long drive, past towns that got smaller and smaller, then down dirt roads that were barely roads at all. The trees grew thick and close, and the hills just kept rolling, one after another. We finally found the turnoff Dave had marked on his map, just a faint track leading deeper into the woods. We drove as far as we could, then parked the truck and started hiking in with our gear. The air was thick and humid, even though it was late fall. The leaves crunched loud under our boots. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your ears feel funny. After about an hour of walking, pushing through tangled undergrowth, we started seeing signs of old settlement. A few moss-covered stone walls, then a collapsed lean-to. And then, there they were, rising out of the trees like forgotten teeth. 2 tall stone chimneys, standing perfectly upright, all that was left of whatever house used to be there. They were covered in ivy, dark and ancient. We dropped our packs excited. This was exactly what we were looking for. We pulled out the metal detectors and started sweeping the ground around the chimneys. The ground was lumpy, uneven, covered in thick moss and dead leaves. It felt soft, like walking on old pillows. We found a few pieces of broken pottery, some rusty nails, nothing major. But it was still cool. Then, as Dave was walking around the edge of the clearing, he stopped. "Hey guys," he called out, "check this out." We walked over. Nailed to a massive ancient oak tree was a weathered piece of wood. It looked like it had been ripped off an old fence or barn. On it, scrawled in faded, black paint, were 2 words: "Stay off our graves." We all looked at it. Then we looked at each other. Mark snorted. "Graves? Seriously?" Probably some old local trying to scare people off his land, trying to keep us from finding his buried treasure. Chris nodded. "Yeah, just folklore. Every old place like this has some story." I felt a little shiver. The ground around the chimneys did feel really lumpy, like there were mounds under the moss. But we'd heard about these kinds of things before. Old families sometimes buried their dead right on their homesteads. It wasn't unheard of. We just figured it was a weird warning, a bit of local flavor. Didn't mean anything bad was actually going to happen. So, we ignored it. We stepped right over what looked like a few sunken grave mounds, big lumps in the ground, and started digging. We figured if it was graves, they were ancient, probably nothing but bones left anyway. We were just looking for metal scraps, anything interesting from the old house. We dug for a few hours, uncovering rusty bits of metal, a broken buckle, some old glass bottles. Nothing major, but it was fun. We were making jokes, laughing about the graves. As the sun started to set, painting the sky with deep reds and purples, we decided to make camp right there, in the clearing, maybe 50 feet from the chimneys. We pitched our 4 tents in a circle around a small fire pit we cleared. The air got cold fast, and the quiet came back, heavier now. We cooked some food over the fire, the smell of burnt hot dogs mixing with the damp earth. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by a low hum of chatter, mostly about what we'd found. But the warning sign kept poking into my mind. We stayed up late, just talking, listening to the crackle of the fire. The trees around us seemed to press in closer in the darkness. Every now and then, I'd look towards the dark lumps on the ground that looked like graves. I could almost feel eyes on us, watching. But it was probably just the isolation, the dark, making us jumpy. Eventually we were all tired. We zipped up our tents and crawled into our sleeping bags. I woke up with a jolt. The air was cold, damp. My body was stiff, like I'd been lying in one position for hours without moving. My back ached, and my neck was sore. I blinked, confused. I wasn't in my tent. I was lying on the ground, outside. My sleeping bag was still inside my tent, which was zipped up tight. My head was resting on a patch of rough earth, and I could feel twigs poking into my scalp. My hands were splayed out on the dirt, and when I looked at them in the dim pre-dawn light, my fingernails were packed with fresh, dark soil, like I'd been digging. A wave of confusion, then terror, washed over me. How did I get out here? I don't sleepwalk. I quickly pushed myself up, my muscles screaming. I looked around wildly. It was still dark, but a faint gray light was just starting to appear over the distant trees. I looked at Mark's tent. He was outside too, lying on his side, curled up, just outside his tent. And Chris. He was also out of his tent, flat on his back, staring up at the darkening sky, completely still. "Guys," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Wake up." Mark stirred, groaning. He slowly sat up, rubbing his eyes, looking just as confused as I was. "What the hell?" he muttered. "How'd I get out here?" He looked at his hands, then at mine. His nails were also caked with dirt. Chris was slower to respond. He finally sat up, his movements stiff and jerky, like an old robot. His face was pale, his eyes wide, a faraway look in them. His fingernails were also full of dirt. We were all outside our tents, stiff, aching, with dirt under our nails, 3 of us. "Where's Dave?" Mark asked, his voice shaking. We looked at Dave's tent. It was still perfectly zipped up, too perfectly. "Dave?" I called out, my voice louder now, a tremor in it. "Dave, you in there?" Silence. A chilling, absolute silence. "Dave!" Mark yelled, louder this time, his voice cracking with panic. We all scrambled to Dave's tent. I grabbed the zipper and pulled it down. His tent was empty. No sleeping bag, no backpack, no Dave, just the empty tent, perfectly set up, like he'd vanished into thin air. My breath caught in my throat. This was bad, really bad. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. What happened? Where was he? How did we all end up outside our tents, with dirt in our nails? Then I saw it. Next to the empty tent, lying flat on the ground, was Dave's shovel. The one we'd been using to dig for metal scraps yesterday. It was stuck upright in a patch of fresh earth. A small, neat mound of freshly dug soil, maybe 2 feet long, a foot wide. My blood ran cold. "No," Chris whispered, his voice flat, emotionless. He just kept staring at the small mound of earth. We circled it slowly, not daring to touch it. It was too perfect, too deliberate. Dave's shovel, stuck in freshly dug earth, and Dave, gone. I looked around the clearing, desperate. Maybe he'd just gone for a walk? But who goes for a walk in the middle of the night, stark naked, and leaves their tent empty and their shovel stuck in a fresh patch of dirt? Then, just beyond the small mound of earth, almost hidden by a patch of weeds, I saw a stone. It looked like a marker. A simple, rough piece of fieldstone, maybe a foot tall. And on it, carved deep into the gray surface, was a name. David. My eyes widened. It wasn't a recent carving. It looked old, weathered, like the stone had been sitting there for 100 years, the letters worn down by rain and wind. But it was his name. Our friend Dave. And it was right next to the freshly dug earth where his shovel was. We stood there, frozen, staring at the stone. The sun was starting to come up now, bathing the clearing in a soft, eerie light. The chimneys stood silent, watching. The ground felt different beneath my feet now, heavy, like it was holding secrets. "We have to go," I finally managed to say, my voice a croak. "Now. Get everything. We leave." We moved like zombies, our minds reeling, numb with shock and terror. We grabbed our packs, not bothering to fold anything, just stuffing our gear inside. We didn't even touch Dave's tent or his shovel. We just left them there, next to the small, fresh mound of earth, next to the stone with his name carved into it. It was like we were afraid to touch anything that had been near him, near whatever had taken him. We stumbled back to the truck, not talking, not looking back. We crashed through the undergrowth, our minds screaming. The truck started with a roar, and I slammed it into drive, tearing down the dirt track, leaving that clearing, that place, behind us. We drove for hours, not stopping, not speaking. The sun climbed higher, but the warmth did nothing to chase away the cold that had settled in our bones. We just stared straight ahead, watching the road, trying to outrun what had happened. When we finally got back to civilization, to a gas station with bright lights and other people, we still couldn't really talk about it. We just filled up the tank, grabbed some water, and kept going. We dropped Chris off first, then Mark. We just nodded, barely meeting each other's eyes. You gonna call the police?" Mark asked, his voice hollow. I looked at him. What would we even say? I gestured vaguely. He just vanished, in the middle of nowhere, and there's a new grave that just popped up? I shook my head. They'd think we did something to him, or that we were crazy. Mark nodded slowly. He knew I was right. There was no way to explain it, no way to tell anyone what had happened out there. We just agreed, silently, to never talk about it again, not to anyone, not even to each other. I drove home in silence, the empty seat beside me where Dave used to sit feeling like a gaping hole. My hands still felt gritty, like there was dirt stuck under my nails, even after I scrubbed them raw. That was the last time the three of us ever saw each other. We didn't contact each other again. Not a single text, not a call, not an email. It was like we had all made a silent agreement to just cut ties with that day and with each other. It was too much. The memory of what happened in those woods, the empty tent, the shovel, and Dave's name on that ancient-looking stone, it was too heavy. I still have nightmares. Sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling stiff and cold, with the distinct phantom sensation of dirt under my fingernails. I always check my hands, even though I know it's not real. I never went exploring old ruins again. I never went camping in the deep woods. And I never, ever ignored a sign again, especially one that said, "Stay off our graves," because some land, it ain't yours. And some warnings, they're not folklore. They're real. And if you ignore them, you might just become part of the land. I was driving through West Virginia, just rambling, really. I like those old back roads, the ones that twist and turn through the mountains, where you see more deer than cars. I wasn't really going anywhere special, just getting away from the everyday grind, listening to some old country music, and watching the scenery roll by. The sun was getting low, and I knew I'd need to fill up my gas tank soon, but I wasn't worried. There were always little towns, little gas stations, even in the middle of nowhere. I'd been on this particular stretch of road for a while, a narrow 2-lane highway winding through dense forest. I'd passed it 100 times before, maybe more. I knew this area pretty well, or so I thought. Then I saw it. Up ahead, through the trees, there was a light, a really bright, glowing light. It looked like a gas station. My eyebrows went up. I swore I'd never seen a gas station on this road before. Not here. It was too remote. But there it was, glowing like a beacon in the darkening twilight. As I got closer, I could see the pump lights, almost blindingly bright, and the warm, inviting glow from inside the convenience store. My stomach growled. I figured I could get a snack while I was there too. It was definitely out of place, but hey, maybe it was new. Maybe they just built it. I slowed down, turning into the gravel lot. It was surprisingly quiet. No other cars, just my old sedan pulling up to the pumps. I got out, grabbed the nozzle, and started pumping gas. As I did, I noticed a small, hand-carved wooden sign leaning against an old, gnarled oak tree near the edge of the lot. It was rough, unfinished wood, and the letters looked like they'd been cut by hand, a bit wobbly. It read, "Never was a store here." I stopped pumping for a second, staring at it. I chuckled. "That's weird," I mumbled to myself. Some kind of local joke, maybe, or a nod to the fact that this area was so remote. A joke about how surprised you'd be to find a store out here. I shrugged, finished pumping my gas, and decided to go inside for a soda and a snack. The glowing light from the store felt really welcoming after the long drive. I pushed open the glass door. A small bell jingled above my head. The air inside was warm, and it smelled dusty, like old wood and something vaguely metallic. The store was small, just a single aisle, really. The shelves were packed, but not with the usual stuff you'd see in a gas station mart. There were no bright, colorful bags of chips, no rows of candy bars. Instead, every shelf was lined with identical, unlabeled canned goods. Gray, dull cans, with no pictures, no words. Just a faint, almost unnoticeable seam down the side. My gaze moved to the counter. Behind it stood a man. He was tall, thin, with a long, gaunt face and eyes that were strangely still. He wasn't blinking. Not once. He just stood there, staring straight ahead, completely motionless. His skin was pale, almost translucent. He wore a simple, plain brown shirt and dark pants. Just a soda, please," I said, walking towards the fridge. I grabbed a cold cola, feeling a bit uneasy now. The whole place felt off, like a dream. I walked back to the counter and placed the soda down. The man didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared. It was starting to really creep me out. His eyes were dark, like black holes. "That'll be," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. $5. $5 for a soda? That was crazy. But I just wanted to get out of there. I pulled out a $5 bill and handed it to him. He took it, his fingers brushing mine. They were cold. Really cold, like touching ice. He didn't put the money in a register. There wasn't a register, now that I looked. Just a smooth wooden counter. He just held the bill in his hand, not moving, still staring. "Can I get a receipt?" I asked, feeling a strange desperation to get something normal out of this interaction. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes still unblinking. "No need for that," he said, his voice just as flat as before. I picked up my soda. "Okay, well, thanks," I mumbled, turning to leave. I walked towards the door, the small bell jingling again as I pushed it open. I stepped back out into the night, feeling a rush of relief to be out of that creepy store. I walked towards my car, took a sip of my soda. It tasted flat, like it had no fizz. I got in my car, put the soda in the cup holder, and started the engine. I put it in reverse, ready to back out onto the road. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the road wasn't there. Instead of the two-lane highway I just turned off, there was only dense forest. The trees pressed in, dark and unyielding. No road, just the endless black woods. I slammed on the brakes. My heart started to pound. What the hell? I put the car in drive and pulled forward a few feet, then backed up again. Still no road, just trees. I tried turning the car around in the small gravel lot, driving towards where the entrance should have been. But there was no entrance. Just the dark, silent forest. It was like the road had vanished. Panic started to bubble up in my chest. I drove around the small perimeter of the lot, a few loops, hoping I was just disoriented. But every time, no matter which way I went, I ended up facing the same wall of trees. The gas station was still there, glowing brightly, unnervingly. The hand-carved sign, "Never was a store here," seemed to mock me now. I got out of the car again, my legs shaky. I walked to the edge of the lot, shining my phone's flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Just an impenetrable wall of darkness. No road, no tracks, nothing. I walked over to the hand-carved sign again. I stared at it, the words burning into my mind. Never was a store here. I ran back to my car, got in, and slammed the door. I tried the engine again, flooring the gas pedal, hoping to just burst through the trees. But the car just spun its tires on the gravel. It felt like an invisible wall was around the entire lot. I looked at the store. The bright, unnatural glow from inside seemed to pulsate. I could see the tall, unblinking clerk standing behind the counter, perfectly still, just staring straight ahead. And as I watched, it seemed like he was closer to the door than before. Just a few inches, maybe, but definitely closer. A cold dread spread through me. I was trapped. In a gas station that shouldn't exist, with an unblinking clerk, and no way out. I spent what felt like hours, trying everything. I honked the horn. I flashed my lights. I screamed out the window. Nothing. The woods remained silent. The clerk remained still. The road remained invisible. Every time I looked at the store, the clerk seemed to be a little closer to the door. Slowly, deliberately, inch by agonizing inch, he was moving. He wasn't walking, it was more like he was sliding. It was barely noticeable, but after a while, I could tell he was definitely closer to the front of the store, like he was coming for me. My panic reached a new level. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I was going crazy. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I don't know when it happened, or how. Maybe it was a burst of adrenaline, a moment of sheer, desperate terror. I remember seeing the clerk's face, pale and emotionless, just behind the glass door, much closer than he'd been before. His dark, unblinking eyes seemed to bore into mine. It felt like he was right outside, waiting. I screamed, and I just slammed the car into drive, mashed the gas pedal to the floor, and aimed for the darkness where the road should have been. I closed my eyes, bracing for the crash. I heard a sickening lurch, a grinding noise, and then nothing. Silence. The engine had died. I slowly opened my eyes. I was still in the gravel lot, facing the dark wall of trees. But the gas station, it was gone. The bright, glowing lights were gone. The building itself was gone. The hand-carved sign was gone. There was just a small, empty patch of gravel in the middle of a dense, dark forest. It was like it had never been there. My mind couldn't process it. One moment, it was there, terrifying and real. The next, it was gone, leaving nothing but empty air. I must have blacked out. When I woke up, the sun was bright, blindingly so. The air was warm, and I was lying in a ditch by the side of a highway. My body ached all over, my clothes were dirty, and my head throbbed. I had no idea where I was. There was a faint smell of exhaust fumes and damp earth. I slowly pushed myself up, groaning. My car was parked normally on the shoulder of the road, a few feet away. It looked fine. No damage, no signs of a crash. My gas tank was full. I blinked, trying to clear my head. How did I get in a ditch? How did I get here? I tried to remember the last few hours, but it was all a blur. Just snippets of memory, the glowing store, the unblinking clerk, the vanished road. It felt like a really bad dream, a nightmare. I stumbled out of the ditch and got back into my car. My head was spinning. I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, telling myself it was just exhaustion. Maybe I'd hit my head. I put the car in drive and pulled back onto the highway. As I drove, I noticed something in the back seat. A dark, damp stain on the passenger seat. It looked like a spill. I pulled over and looked closer. It was a reddish-brown stain, like old, dried blood, but it didn't smell like blood. It smelled metallic and sickly sweet. I touched it. It was sticky. My blood ran cold. I hadn't spilled anything in my car, and the stain was too big, too dark. It looked like someone, or something, had been sitting there. Then I remembered the soda. I looked in the cup holder. The can was still there, untouched, still sealed. I picked it up. It felt heavy. I shook it. No fizz. I squeezed it slightly. It felt solid, like it was full of something thick. My hands started to tremble. I knew I hadn't bought that soda. I knew I had picked up a regular can of cola. But this wasn't a regular can of cola. I quickly pulled over again, heart pounding. I carefully pulled the can from the cup holder. I didn't want to open it. I knew, somehow, deep in my gut, that whatever was inside, I didn't want to see it. I threw the can onto the floor of the passenger side, then covered it with my jacket. I just wanted it out of my sight. I drove straight home, not stopping, not looking back. I felt sick to my stomach. When I got home, I immediately took a shower, trying to wash away the feeling of the ditch, the stain, the can. I tried to forget, but I can't. I still have nightmares about that glowing gas station, and sometimes, when I'm driving on those back roads, I find myself looking for it, just a flicker of light through the trees. I always try to convince myself it was just a hallucination, a really vivid dream. But then I remember the stain on my back seat, which never came out, no matter how hard I tried to clean it. And I remember the can, which I eventually threw away, still sealed, still heavy, still filled with that strange, flat liquid. And sometimes, when I'm driving through those old, familiar roads, I'll swear I see, just for a second, leaning against an old, gnarled tree at the edge of the woods, a small, hand-carved sign. The words burned into my memory. Never was a store here. There's this old quarry outside of Clarksville, just a few miles past the last gas station and pretty much at the edge of nowhere. It used to be a big deal back in the day, lots of rock coming out of there, but it's been abandoned for years now. Just a huge hole in the ground, filled with dark water, surrounded by forest. People go there sometimes for hiking or just to get away from everything. It's got a bit of a reputation. Even the locals tell stories about it. I always liked going there to clear my head. Something about the vastness of the quarry, the quiet. It put things in perspective. One time, I was driving out there, and I saw a new sign posted near the start of the quarry trail. It was just a small wooden thing, tacked onto a tree. Hand-painted, like the others I'd seen around these parts. The words were simple, but they caught my eye. If you hear her singing, walk away. Don't answer. Don't listen. I snorted. Her singing? I thought. Seriously? I figured it was just another one of those local legends, meant to scare off tourists or keep kids from wandering too close to the dangerous quarry edge. Every place has its weird stories. I liked a good creepy tale as much as the next guy, but I didn't actually believe in ghosts or singing spirits. So I just shrugged it off and kept walking, heading towards my favorite spot overlooking the water. I should have listened to that sign. I really should have. I spent the afternoon just sitting there, watching the water, throwing rocks, thinking about nothing. The sun started to go down, painting the sky with deep reds and purples. I had my tent and a sleeping bag, planning to camp out tonight. There was no one else around, which was just what I wanted. As the last bit of light faded, the stars started to come out, slowly at first, then a million tiny pinpricks against the black velvet sky. The air got cold, fast, and the quiet pressed in, heavy and deep. I built a small fire, just big enough to give off some warmth and light. The crackle of the wood was the only sound for a long time. I ate some stale chips and a sandwich, staring into the flames. I felt pretty good, actually, really relaxed. The sign was long forgotten. Then, as the night got really dark, when the fire had burned down to just embers, I heard it. A woman's voice. It was soft at first, almost like a whisper, drifting through the trees. A lullaby. Slow, gentle, like a mother singing to a child. It wasn't creepy at all. It was actually really beautiful. My head tilted. Where was it coming from? It seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere. The sign popped back into my head. If you hear her singing, walk away. I told myself it was just someone else camping nearby, someone with a really clear voice. But I hadn't seen any other cars. And the sound seemed too perfect, too pure, to be a normal person just singing in the woods. It wasn't like a radio, it was just a voice, no music. The singing continued, a sweet, mournful melody. It started to feel familiar somehow, like I'd heard it before, a long, long time ago. My mind drifted, and I felt a strange sense of comfort. It was pulling me in, this voice. Gently, sweetly. Then the voice changed. It was still a lullaby, still beautiful, but now it was my mother's voice. The exact sound of her voice when she used to sing me to sleep when I was a little kid. I hadn't heard that sound in years. A wave of nostalgia, soft and warm, washed over me. Tears pricked at my eyes. It felt so real, so comforting. My heart ached with a strange mixture of happiness and sadness. Don't listen. The sign's words echoed faintly in my mind, but they were drowned out by the sweetness of the lullaby. How could I walk away from my mom's voice? It felt so good to hear it again. I slowly stood up, my feet feeling light, pulled by the sound. I started walking towards it, deeper into the trees, towards the quarry edge. The singing grew clearer, louder, filling my head. It was leading me. And then, the voice changed again. It wasn't my mother anymore. It was a girl I used to love, way back in high school. Her voice, her exact tone, singing the same lullaby. It brought back all these old memories, good ones and bad ones, a bittersweet ache in my chest. I felt a pang of regret, a longing for something lost. The voice seemed to hold all those feelings, all those memories, in its perfect, clear notes. My feet kept moving, walking through the dark woods, towards the quarry edge. I was mesmerized. The world around me faded away, replaced by the perfect, haunting beauty of the singing. I was so close to understanding where it came from. Then the voice changed one last time. And now it was my voice, my own voice, singing the lullaby. It was perfectly, terrifyingly, my own. My specific inflections, my little quirks, my breaths. It wasn't an echo. It was me, singing to myself from somewhere out there in the darkness. A shiver, cold and sharp, went through me. This wasn't normal, this wasn't a dream, this was wrong. My own voice, singing, in the middle of the dark, silent woods. Don't answer. The sign screamed in my head now, loud and clear. But it was too late. I was already walking towards it. My own voice, calling me. I broke through the last line of trees and stood at the very edge of the quarry. The huge, black expanse of water lay below me, still and dark, reflecting the faint stars. The singing was unbelievably loud now, echoing off the quarry walls, vibrating in my bones, my own voice. And then I saw something. In the water, below me, near the opposite edge of the quarry, a figure. It was standing waist-deep in the black water, perfectly still. Just a dark silhouette against the fainter darkness of the water. It wasn't moving, just standing there, facing away from me, towards the opposite side of the quarry. But the singing was not coming from the figure. It was coming from above me. My head snapped up. The lullaby, my voice, was echoing from the air directly above me, seeming to surround me, pressing down. It was everywhere. Not from the person in the water. Not from the trees. From the sky. My breath caught in my throat. I suddenly felt cold, colder than the night air. The figure in the water was still, silent. The singing was all around me, my own voice, chillingly real. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground. My mind was screaming, but no sound came out. I don't know what happened next. The memory is just a black void. One moment, I was standing at the quarry edge, paralyzed by the sound of my own voice singing from above, staring at the silent figure in the water. The next, I woke up. The first light of dawn was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky with a pale, sickly yellow. I was lying on the cold, hard ground, far from the quarry edge, maybe 100 feet back into the woods. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. My clothes were soaked with dew. I slowly pushed myself up, groaning. My head throbbed. My hands felt strange. I looked at them. My fingertips were torn, scraped raw, and bleeding, like I had been clawing at something, or trying to climb. They were covered in dirt and dried blood. I looked down at my feet. My boots were gone, completely. Just my socks, covered in mud and little bits of leaves. I blinked. My boots? Where were they? I never take them off, especially not while camping. And my memory? It was just gone. A blank. I remembered getting to the quarry yesterday, sitting by the fire, hearing the singing. I remembered it changing. But after that, nothing. Just a giant, dark hole in my mind. I stumbled back to my campsite. My tent was still there, zipped up. My backpack, my sleeping bag. Everything looked normal, except for my missing boots and my torn, bleeding fingertips. And the black hole in my memory. I grabbed my pack, not even bothering to break down the tent. I just needed to get out of there. I walked back to my car, my feet freezing in my socks, wincing with every step on the rough ground. The sign at the trailhead seemed to glare at me, the words stark and clear. If you hear her singing, walk away. Don't answer. Don't listen. I had listened. I had answered. And now, I was missing pieces of my memory. My hands were torn, and my boots were gone. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was well out of the mountains, back on paved roads, among other people. I tried to tell myself it was just a strange dream, a really bad night terror. But the raw skin on my fingertips, the missing boots, they were real. And the blank spot in my memory, that was real too. It was like a piece of me had been taken. Sometimes, at night, when everything is quiet, I hear it. Faintly, not the whole lullaby, just a fragment, a sustained note, or a soft hum, and it sounds like my voice. Not from outside, not from a speaker, but from inside my head. It echoes, a low, unsettling resonance, like it's coming from somewhere deep down, from underwater. And I know, with a cold certainty, that it's a part of what I left behind at the quarry. A part of me that answered the singing.